whispered, proclaim from the housetops. Do not fear those who kill the body but cannot kill the soul. Rather, fear him who can destroy both soul and body in hell. Are not 2 sparrows sold for a penny, yet not one of them will fall to the ground unperceived by your Father, and even the hairs of your head are all counted. So do not be afraid. You are of more value than many sparrows. So even when persecution of his followers could have meant execution, could have meant death, Jesus urged them to have no fear. Even when they faced much more than we face in exercising our religious beliefs. He told them to trust in God and continue to proclaim the gospel. He was telling them to hold fast to their belief and faith. For us, being Christian in our world and in our time can be challenging too. Although we here in this sanctuary have little cause to fear official violence because of our faith, we are nevertheless challenged because of our faith in many, many other ways. It isn't always the popular thing to uphold Christian principles. It isn't always the popular thing to profess our faith in a loving and saving God in a world such as ours. Christians are often mocked and accused of all sorts of things, from being hypocritical to being too judgmental to just being misguided, even if those criticisms don't apply. Even when those criticisms are unfair. Sometimes those words are aimed at Christians for the sole purpose of wounding the soul and of undermining our faith. Sometimes they are meant to provoke and sometimes to steer us away from the principles of the gospel. In the gospel reading this morning, Jesus tells us not to allow threatening and offensive words to wound us, not to allow the attacks when they come to weaken our faith. Don't allow it. Stand up to it. He tells us to continue to believe, for us to continue to proclaim the faith, shouting it from the housetops. Do not fear the people who would threaten us. That is what Jesus told his disciples. That's what Jesus tells us. Now, one of the things that I want to point out this morning is that we are living in an age that too often the threats to our faith and the come not from a hostile government or from secular groups that feel threatened by the existence of Christians. Too often in our age, those kinds of threats come from within, between the divisions of the church, and sometimes deep and contentious divisions within the church itself. Christian against Christian, believer against believer. Those groups separate and begin to hurl verbal assaults at each other, which only further divide, and we begin to behave in ways that don't look much like disciples of Christ. Unfortunately, in our current struggle over the acceptable bounds of human sexuality, such divisive rhetoric is generated from one side or the other in increasingly emotional and aggressive postures. It is my belief that as we engage in this important conversation moving forward, we can't behave in ways or speak in ways that is counter to the very teachings of Jesus. We can't do it. Although we Americans sometimes fight amongst ourselves over many issues, and sadly, some of the disagreements have turned violent, I believe that I can also say with sincerity that there is a fundamental belief in this country that we are unified, that we are one country united by one set of values, and those values coalesce around the idea of freedom. That brings us together, regardless of what we may think on any particular political issue. We may disagree with each other on what that should look like, but that freedom binds us together is widespread, I believe. When we lose sight of that fundamental idea, it will undermine the strength that is at the heart of our country. We can disagree and love each other as countrymen at the same time. Isn't that a novel idea, that we can disagree with each other but still love each other? There's no reason we can't do both. That's what our history tells us that we should do. But the coarse and unchristian attitudes prevalent today permeate all aspects of our lives. And I fear that it even permeates the church at times. It's infected the church as well. And there is a single fundamental idea that unifies the church of Christ. There is one fundamental idea, just as freedom is that fundamental idea for the country to come together. There is a fundamental idea for the church to come together, and it's not what you might think. One thing above all others that bothers me the most about the current crisis facing the church today has nothing to do with the specific issues that we're debating, has nothing to do with those specific issues. As I argued last week, there's absolutely nothing new about our current conflict and divisions, nothing new about the divisions of the church.